Professor Curtis, your instructor for this course, and this is the lecture for Chapter 30, Light Emission. Let's get started. So to start off with, let's go ahead and review the structure of the atom that we saw earlier in Chapter 11. And to simplify things, we're going to use a planetary model. This is the model that was proposed by Niels Bohr back at the start of the 20th century. And it's not exactly the way that is actually happening, but it's good enough for our simplified purposes. So we have electrons that are orbiting around the nucleus composed of protons and neutrons, and the electrons have their different orbits around the center, which is the nucleus. So the electrons are occupying what we call shells around the nucleus. And we call them shells because the circles are really more like, they're actually called clouds, because it's like if you extend it to like 3 dimensions, you get sort of like balloon shapes. So if you ever like party balloons, that's really what the, areas of the orbitals are more shaped like. But we can use the planetary model of the atom and think about spheres. So you've got different shells that are surrounding the nucleus. And each element has its own characteristic pattern of energy states, which are called shells. So each of these different shells where the electrons are orbiting around the nucleus have different levels of energy. The more distant an electron is from the nucleus, the higher its energy level. So the ground state, which is the orbital that's closest to the nucleus, we call that ground because, that's the base level of energy. And then the next one up, has higher energy, and the next one up has higher energy than that. The next one up has higher energy than that. And each element in the periodic table has a distinct characteristic pattern of energy states of electrons that are orbiting around the nucleus. This brings us to the principle of excitation. So because each of these different orbits represent different energy levels, you can actually, when you move an electron from one state to another that's higher, you get what's called excitation. So you take an electron in one orbital and you bring it to the next one out, then that atom is going to be what we call excited, because the electron is moved up to a higher energy level. But, that's not the natural state of the element. And so because of that, there's going to be an impetus for nature to come in, restore the balance, so that electron is going to go back down to its original level. Well, that original level has a lower energy level. Remember, conservation of energy says energy is going to be conserved. So where's the difference of energy between the two levels? What happens to that energy? Well, it gets released as a photon of light. And this is what we call de-excitation, where the electron's moving down to a lower energy orbital. We can get the electrons to move to a higher orbital through different means: thermal agitation, bombardment by particles, also by absorbing a photon. So just as it emits a photon when it goes down, it can absorb a photon to move it up. Different examples of excitation that we're familiar with in the natural world. You've got gas discharge tubes. So all the neon lights that you see, that's an example of excitation. You're putting a current through the gas. The electrons in the neon are actually moving to a higher energy level, gets them all excited. That's excitation. Flames, remember we saw plasma was just simply ionized gas. And so what we're doing is we're putting in extra energy so that those electrons in the atoms are taking on a higher energy state. The aurora borealis or australis is another example we see in the natural phenomenon. This lights that we see in the sky, that's just an example of excitation. The electrons that are in the individual atoms of the gases, they're in the atmosphere, are being excited. They're moving to a higher energy level, and so they give off light when they come back down to their natural state. So this brings us to the concept of emission spectra, because just as each element, okay, has its own characteristic pattern of electron energy levels, that means that when you excite an element, it's going to emit light with a distinctive pattern of frequencies, okay? And of course, different frequencies have different wavelengths, which we interpret as different colors. So you have a source of light that's being emitted through a lens, and then that lens is then used to focus the light through a slit, where the slit is placed at the focal length of the lens. Okay, the light going through the slit, as we saw with Young's double slit experiment, that's going to get separated out. We put that through another lens, which then goes through a prism, and then we can actually separate out the light with the different wavelengths, and we can actually make a pattern on a screen that gives us a distinctive pattern for the element that we're looking at. Now, this is something what we call an atomic fingerprint, because each element has its own distinctive pattern. So if we look at the pattern that's being produced by the excitation of whatever element that is in the source of light that we're using in the setup, we can get that distinctive pattern on the screen, and then we can easily say, yes, we know what element this is by looking at the pattern. This is what we call an emission spectrum. It's a spectrum that's created by the emission of light. Here are some examples of emission spectra that we see for some different elements. Incandescent bulb producing white light. White light, of course, combination of all the different wavelengths of visible light. That's why you see a full spectrum there. Hydrogen, on the other hand, very distinctive pattern, different from sodium, different from mercury. Each element has its own pattern of spectra that gets produced on the screen with this process. And so that's why we call it an atomic fingerprint. Because if you look at the pattern, you can easily discern what element it is that you're looking at. Here's a video that shows us a little bit more about emission spectra, so hopefully we can get this to work. And yeah, let's give this a go.
What you will see in this video are vials of elemental vapors that have been excited by 20,000 volts of electricity. As the excited electrons fall back down to their lower energy levels, they give off light. As you can see in this xenon, a diffraction grating is used to split the light into its discrete lines in the emission spectrum. Each line corresponds to one exact frequency of light emitted by the atom of xenon. The emission spectrum of each element is like a person's fingerprint. Just as no two people have the same fingerprints, no two elements have the same emission spectrum. In the same way that fingerprints identify people, atomic emission spectra are useful for identifying elements. By this point, you have probably already noted that not all spectral lines have the same intensity. Some are stronger and some are weaker.
All right, so like I said, not the most exciting video ever made, but it does do a very good job of showing the difference of the emission spectra. The last lab that we're actually going to do is going to play with emission spectra. So if you thought that this was kind of interesting to see the different atomic fingerprints, then just hang on to your hat, because that last lab that we're going to do, we're going to work with emission spectra. And let's see if we can get this to go. There we go. So now that brings us to the concept of incandescence. Incandescence was coming from a Latin word that means to grow hot. And that's why we call incandescent light bulbs, because, well, the way that the bulb produces light is the really thin wire, usually made of tungsten, and you put a lot of current through it, and it glows red hot, and it produces light as a part of that process, and that's what we call incandescence, and so therefore it's an incandescent light bulb. Well, the light that's emitted contains an infinite number of frequencies. So if you were to actually look at the spectrum of frequencies, okay, it's you basically get a distribution, and so that's the light that you see there in the graphic. The light can have a tint, or it can be white, but the electrons are not as tightly bound, okay, as in metals, or fully unbound as in plasma, so you're somewhere in between. They generate all frequencies in the curve, and you get that distribution that you see there in the graphic. So essentially, the peak frequency, which is the frequency at the top of the graph, okay, that's going to be directly proportional to the temperature of whatever it is that's producing the actual light. And it's this effect that allows us to know the temperatures of celestial bodies, stars that are out in the universe. We can actually get the frequency of light coming from the star, and then the peak frequency from all the different frequencies that we get, that's going to be directly proportional to the temperature. We can also use this, the temperature of the little filament wire there inside your incandescent light bulb. Yeah, if we get the peak frequency from the light that's being produced by it, then we can know what the temperature is going to be. There's a direct proportionality between the two. Now, on the flip side to emission spectra is what we call absorption spectra. So if we take white light and we view it from an incandescent source with a spectroscope, then we get a continuous spectrum that's seen. So we're setting it up here through the same sort of mechanism, but instead of actually, burning, or exciting the element that's producing the spectrum, now we're actually getting incandescent light and putting that through a vaporized portion of the element, and then, of course, that element is going to absorb the light that corresponds with its atomic fingerprint, and then what's left is actually passed through the same apparatus to produce a pattern there on the screen. So the pattern that we see here is actually dark lines, okay, through a colored background, and so that makes it an absorption spectrum. So here's some differences here between the spectrum, and we're looking at hydrogen here. So the absorption spectrum, notice it's got a colored background with dark lines going through it. The dark lines are the natural fingerprint from the hydrogen that's being absorbed as the incandescent light passes through that hydrogen gas. It's the exact opposite of what we see with the emission spectrum. If we excite hydrogen gas in a tube and then get the spectrum from that light that's emitted, we have a dark background with colored lines. So we get the exact reverse of the emission spectrum with the absorption spectrum, which makes sense because one, you're actually giving it out, the other, you're actually taking it in. But what are the real differences between the emission and absorption spectra? Well, there's nothing that's really different between them. What you're seeing is just dependent on your background. Okay? The reason why one point in one spectrum is bright and dark in the other is that during emission, energy travels one direction. During absorption, energy goes the other way. So that's why you see the flip-flop between the different images. You know, in one sense, you're actually giving off the fingerprint, and the other, you're actually taking it in. That brings us to the end of this lecture. Hope you found it helpful. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.